I put together a presentation because it felt like the easiest way to do it. Because I'm going to go through quite a lot of I'm going to give you like a crash course in of like a year-long course, basically. Um, and it's going to be quite kind of high-level stuff. But I'm going to put the presentation into SharePoint so you can kind of go back and read any information I missed, or now you know the names of stuff so you can look it up or you can ask me or whatever. So yeah, this is the kind of fundamentals of UX and UI. Going to go through a few things. So first, very quickly, I'm going to cover the difference between UX and UI, just to kind of give you a bit of understanding of what I'm actually talking about. 10 usability heuristics, which is sort of 10 things that you can judge your product by to see what parts am I hitting, what parts am I missing, how successful is this? The double diamond, which is sort of a broad process of how to approach building and designing along with research, and then some kind of processes and tools that I use and that kind of most people use. Obviously, there'll be a ton of other tools that I'm not going to include, but these are kind of some main ones. So the difference between UX and UI, UI is more aesthetic design. It's sort of it's usable, but it's you're mostly kind of concentrating on does this look nice? What's my branding? Stuff like that. And UX is you're involving the user and you're considering how will this be interacted with? How easily usable is it? And one of the kind of struggles that UX people often have with designers or developers or stakeholders or whatever it might be is selling that usability is as important as how it looks. Obviously, it has to look nice as well. But yeah, what I consider the kind of staples of UX or good UX is consistency, signposting. So, how well are you guiding the user through whatever you're asking them to use? Recognition. So, recognition would be are you using industry standards? Are you using language that they already know? Are you using icons that are kind of familiar? Learnability is kind of the second part to that. So if they don't immediately recognize them, how easy is your product to learn how to use it and how kind of memorable is it? How kind of it comes back to consistency as well. If it's consistent, it's more easily learnable. And then accessibility, which is, are you considering, I don't know, blind people, deaf people, things like that. But I mean, it's not just for that. It's kind of anyone. How easily readable is it? Things like that. So I'm not going to read them here because we're going to go through them. But these are the 10 heuristics. So the first one is visibility of system status. So you want the user to, you want to tell them where they are. You want them to know what they need to do next, where they've come from, kind of contextualize everything for them. So some examples of this are things like loading screens, loading bars, breadcrumbs. And yeah, I put a few kind of real world examples because I feel like it's important to point out that UX isn't just a digital thing, it's anything. So like a tube map has been kind of UX designed because it's not actually what the map looks like, but that's the easiest way for people to kind of take it in and understand it. So the "you are here" on maps is another example of kind of visibility of system status. You want to match between systems and the real world. So speak the user's language, use kind of conventions that they're used to in the real world or conventions that they're used to online or digital, whatever it might be. So an example of this would be on the stove top where you've got the kind of diagram which tells you which stove the little knob is for, so you can kind of see, you can visualize it in real life. Um, Things like how they emulate real compasses on kind of digital maps. Yeah, you'll find a lot of this will be worked out with research. So much of it is kind of talking to users. You want to learn how they understand what you're building. User control and freedom. Users will make mistakes. Your aim is to stop them making mistakes, but it's just part of it. Like that, it's just how it works. They will make mistakes. So the question is, how do you kind of forgive them for those mistakes, and how do you bring them back to the right path? So yeah, this is things like go back buttons, cancel buttons, whatever kind of helps them to recognize they're in the wrong place and takes them back to the right place. And this is kind of the biggest part of usability testing. So put it in front of a user, see what mistake they make. Either we'll get into a bit more kind of error prevention and stuff in a sec, but either try to remove that mistake, or if it's a mistake that comes organically, give them the option to fix the mistake. So then we've got consistency and standards. This one's kind of self-explanatory, but super, super important. Use the same language and kind of buttons or signposting across your product. So like if we have our quick reads are called quick reads, so don't have a button that says view our articles, because it could be two different things. And there's kind of different versions of this. So there's internal consistency, which is kind of design systems, and there's external consistency, which is kind of industry standards. So error prevention, there's a lot of these are kind of to do with error prevention, error recovery, things like that. Again, obviously, if you can remove every potential error, great, but you won't be able to. You want to preempt the error. Let the user know that if they do this, this is what's going to happen. So these are things like little asterisks by kind of required form fields. A good example is how Word, if you cross off Word, it says, do you want to save before closing? So kind of fixing their mistake as it happens. You want to start with big errors and kind of, yeah, pre-warn any unavoidable errors or any recurring errors, and remove memory burden. So that just means don't expect a user to, once they've done it once, to remember that that's what's going to happen. I mean, how many times have you closed off Word and gone, I need to save that? Recognition rather than recall. So recognition is like something you would know immediately, and recall is something that you know, but you have to kind of go back and think about. So if someone asks you your name, obviously you remember your name, but if someone asks you what was the name of your year 3 teacher, you might have to think about it for a second. So this is just using kind of clear language, um, familiar icons. So there'll be things that just make sense because you've used them through your whole life. So kind of buttons going back to kind of video players where you can play, rewind, fast forward, pause. You know those buttons. You don't have to think about what does this button mean. And drop downs are another good example of this, because things like if you have, it's kind of like giving someone a multiple choice rather than an open-ended question. So if someone asks you the capital city of a random country, if you give them 4 options, they're gonna work it out quicker than kind of sitting there and trying to work it out. Yeah, avoid making the user learn if you can, and if you obviously if you need to make them learn, make it consistent. Flexibility and efficiency of use. So this is about learnability. This is kind of the good side of learnability. So your kind of base product should be easily usable for everyone, but you can implement like a scale of knowledge. So I use a lot of design softwares. When you first do it, there's a lot of kind of dragging and clicking, but then there'll be short keys for like reduce this by 10 pixels, move this up by 10 pixels, things like that. Things like setting your home on maps so you don't have to go through and put your postcode in every time, saving preferences, motion interaction, so pinching and double tapping on phones, things like that. So you can do it without using those, but you're just providing a more frequent user, quicker ways to do it. Aesthetics and minimal design. This one is super important. Only what needs to be there should be there is basically the easiest way of putting it. With kind of more minimal design, you can more easily create a hierarchy, because you not only are you guiding the user through the navigation or through certain paths, you're also guiding them down pages and to specific bits of information on certain pages. So it's like how we use a lot of load more buttons. So there's no point in putting 300 articles top to bottom. You want to give them the top 8 articles, and then if they want to learn more or load more, they can do that. little information buttons, things like that. You don't need to put a paragraph of how to use this form field, but if they need a bit more information, they can click a little button. The main thing is if you have a product that is quite similar to other products and theirs is easier to use, they will use theirs and they won't use yours. Um, Kind of a neat thing to remember is, especially with copy, most users scan a page in like an F pattern. So they'll kind of go down the side and then they'll go across sort of titles, subtitles, things like that. So that's just a nice way to remember how to set things up. Help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. So this is after error prevention, obviously. If they've made the error, how well are you telling them that they've made that error? And how well are you kind of signposting them back or offering a solution? So this will be things like if you put in uh, uh, if you forget your password, you've got a forgotten my password button. If you're signing up for something and your username's already taken, it will say this username's taken rather than letting you try to work out what's going wrong and why you can't sign up. So you want to use kind of red font, traditional language, recognizable language, offer solutions, and often kind of you can compartmentalize and highlight the issue. So let's go back to kind of signing up. It will well, better ones will either take you back up the page or kind of put a big red box around the thing that you need to fix. Help and documentation. Obviously, if you don't need help and documentation, that's great. That means you've nailed it, but 99 times out of 100, you will. You don't want to clutter the product with it, but you want to offer the user the option to kind of learn things that they're not quite understanding at the start. So in the real world, this might be like an information desk at a train station. But you've also got kind of manuals, chat box, FAQs. So this is kind of where you put additional information that a user might want to kind of drill down into. And then this is not in the original theory of the 10 heuristics, but pretty much everyone adds it to it now. So accessibility and inclusion is super, super important these days. Well, I mean, it was important before, but not as focused on. Um, so there will be users that use your product that don't have that might be kind of handicapped in some way. Um, so in real worlds, you've got like wheelchair ramps, braille, but in kind of digital products, you want to think about text to speech. So that's when me and Trin put kind of alt text on images for SEO. That's also text to speech. So instead of if it's reading down the page, it will say this picture has two people shaking hands or whatever it might be. But then you've got, I mean, other things like language options. A big one is when building color palettes to avoid colors that are tricky for color blindness. There are a few softwares that can help with this and kind of work out whether these are going to be an issue. I'll talk about one very briefly later. So this is the double diamond. This is how you go from start to finish. The idea is you gather loads of information, break down that information, use that information to come up with a bunch of ideas, and then you simplify those ideas. And the thinking is that this whole process is kind of iterative. So you're never really finished. Even when you've delivered the actions, you can kind of go back, reconsider how you've done it, retest. But yeah, the 4 steps are discover, define, develop, deliver. So I'm going to give you some kind of processes that I might go through. You're probably never going to use all of them, and a good UX designer will use them appropriately to the project rather than just kind of stuffing in processes. So the first thing you want to do, like with most projects, is define the brief. So think about the scope, contain the brief. Don't At this point you don't want to think about things later down the line. You want to think about what do I need to do to be successful in this kind of feature even, or in this wider project. You want to think about goals, already start considering the user. Think about some assumptions that you can either validate or prove wrong. A big part of the early stages of UX is validating whether the product that you want to make or you've been asked to make is actually worthwhile. Like, if you put a user in a situation, is this going to help them? But then also kind of just constraints and risks. So is your developer taking a month-long holiday? Might you need to delay the deadline? What are the odds of the project running out of money, etc. Just things like that. So preempting any issues that you might come up with, and obviously starting to try to come up with kind of actions and things you can deliver and when you'll deliver them to give yourself a bit of a timeline. So competitor analysis is quite often where I like to start. This assumes that you're building something that has kind of competitors and not something that's a super standalone. But even then, you can look at kind of design competitors and things like that. So you want to consider your goals, what they do successful, what capabilities they have. Are you hitting a niche that other people are missing? What features do they include? What are they doing poorly? What is the kind of conventional design system? So do they use dashboards? If they use dashboards, how do they structure those dashboards? What language are they using? Things like that. This is where you will get probably most of your information. So normally you kind of start with a survey to because with a survey you can hit a bunch of people. You can reach out really far, and then through the survey you can determine who you might want to speak to further. How useful is that product for them? You're kind of hitting your kind of target audience, finding your target audience, and then you'll probably get to use interviews. Interesting thing, well, I find interesting that most UX designers subscribe to is the idea of kind of diminishing turns within user interviews. So the kind of the quote is that speaking to five users will get you 80% of the information you need, and kind of beyond that, you're just mostly going to get the same stuff over and over again, or you're going to get super niche pain points that you're probably not going to cater for because it's one person out of 100. So yeah, you want to think about your target audience. Then there's kind of just some general interview tips, which I'm sure a lot of you will know. You want to introduce the subject, give context, don't lead questions, let the user kind of take charge as much as possible, because then you want to know how they feel about this. You don't want them to give you the answers that they think you want to give them. They will, yeah, and just be honest. Like if an interview is going to take 15 minutes, say it's going to take 15 minutes. Don't say to someone, like, when you walk down the street and you get the charity people obviously doing great work, but they'll be like, "Oh, can I just have you for 10 seconds?" And then if you do say yes, you're there for 20 minutes, and by the end you're annoyed they're not getting anything useful out of you. And yeah, give incentives. I mean, with surveys, you can do kind of paid surveys. With interviews, when I was training, we'd give people chocolate, and it really worked. So little incentives are nice. Just you want to start the interview off with someone in a good mood, because
Chocolate always works. Yeah.
yes, chocolate
Yeah.
always works. Yeah.
Or
Yeah, the
money.
better
Or
mood, yeah. The better mood they start in, probably the better interview you're going to get. So this is a really, 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 really useful tool. So once you've gathered as much information as possible, put literally every finding, doesn't matter how small it is, put every finding onto a little post-it note or into a little dashboard, and just spend however long it takes grouping everything together. So you can start big, be fluid, communicate, work as a team, be collaborative. Start big, break things down, move quickly, don't think about it too much. Things you want to think about are kind of types of users and typical behaviors. What did you learn from competitors? What was successful? What issues might you run into? What features do you start to think about what features you want to build to overcome some of these things? so a user flow, I think a lot of you will have heard of an experience map. They're quite similar. So basically what it is write out or draw out, this is where the user starts, this is what I want them to accomplish, what steps do they need to get there. So it's good to kind of create a key. So on the top level, you could have what are they seeing, tasks they need to complete. And then the experience map is kind of additional to that. So have a user in front of you doing it, see, okay, they're happy at the start because they're excited to get through this path. In the middle, oh, they got a bit confused. I need to go back and fix that later, that kind of thing. So persona, this seems a little frivolous, but it is actually helpful. You might have more than one, you might just have one, but basically what you want to do is take all the information you've been given and try to create the stereotypical user. Like how old are they? What are their hobbies? How knowledgeable are they on the technology that you're using? What goals they need to accomplish? What's frustrating them about something they already use that they don't think fulfills this goal as well as it could? But yeah, it's just a way to attach what you're trying to accomplish to as a fake but as real a kind of singular person as you can get, and it's a good thing to come back to make sure that you are kind of overcoming their issues. Site mapping. So you want to start doing this quite early. Site mapping is basically write out a basic flow of the entire site. So I mean that includes footers, that includes everything. So here you'll start to think about the navigation. How do users get from A to B? A really, really important thing, which I think was probably the biggest issue with the website when I first came, with the MJ Hudson website when I first came, is you want to keep the sitemap as flat as possible. And by that I mean don't have too many stages. You don't want to hide an important page 4 clicks in because it will never get found. Yeah, you want to develop a hierarchy here. Consider what are your priorities, what pages might need to be added later, and how you can kind of preempt any issue that might create. Now you need to start ideating. These are kind of another thing that sounds a little like you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, but it is really useful. It helps you kind of develop a scope and it helps you be targeted with the features that you're going to create. So there are a million other ones. There are things called jobs to be done. There are things called how might we, like how might we do X. But this is kind of a nice simple one. So scenario kind of flows into the hypothesis and outcome. So scenario is like the user wants to do something so that they can do something else. So the user wants to have a garden so that they can get a dog. And the hypothesis outcome template would be like, we believe that by making gardens cheaper, we can help users have more dogs. We will know this to be true when people have more dogs. Like it's that's a kind of base example, but hopefully that makes sense. Feature prioritization. This is kind of the biggest part of the business coming into how you're going to approach the build. So basically, you want to create sort of a matrix of where do we start, what can come later. So you always start with an MVP, a minimum viable product, and then you can build from that later. So this is just a way of defining your scope again, because like I said, it's an iterative process. So you'll create your MVP, go back, what do I need to add next? What do I need to add next? So it means you can have something out earlier rather than getting it all absolutely nailed on like a year later. So think about what is essential, what's nice to have, kind of monetary and effort costs, time, how long is something going to take, and just kind of put it into it's a nice way of visualizing kind of where you can start. Ideations and design workshops. So start putting everything together. This is a great time to involve stakeholders. You want to compartmentalize features. What are you going to approach in this workshop? Are you going to talk about the sign-in process? Are you going to talk about the buying process? Whatever it might be. Make it fun. Be you can be kind of outlandish here. You might come up with a stupid idea and then a week later think, oh well, actually, if I simplify this a little bit, this could be the main point of our website, whatever it might be. Yeah, set parameters, work quickly. Yeah. So then prototyping testing, I kind of obviously shrunk this bit down loads because this is like most of the design stage. But I've already sort of spoken about MVP versus what you'll have a year down the line. So this is kind of a sort of microcosm of that. So when you start designing, when you start building features, you don't want any pictures, you don't want any writing, you just want to see, can the user get from A to B if I give them the smallest amount of buttons? As you get further along, you'll put in sort of higher fidelities until you get to the end where you've got like a fully designed design system and a nice polished product. You want to test at every stage if you can. The idea is that with a super minimal start, you can get rid of the problems before you get to the super hi-fi design. So you're not spending 10 hours making a graphic that you then find out doesn't work. So it's just a really nice way of rapidly going through to making something usable. Hi-fi design system. So this is kind of towards the end. You probably have some idea of you might be working with a brand that already exists or whatever it might be. So you'll probably have some idea of this. But this is a way to make a set of designs that are learnable and kind of easy to interactive and allow color, allow shape, things like that to become signposts and signifiers. So you might have a primary button and secondary button. You might have a hover over that when you go over it, it's just an outline rather than a filled in button so that you can show, you can indicate interaction there. Yeah, I guess the main point here is the more consistent you are and the more kind of rigorous a system you have, the more users will become familiar with how to use your product and the better you will be set up for future growth. A couple of honorable mentions. I mean, most of you will know what A/B testing is, putting two things out, seeing how they're both interacted with, which one's more successful. But then one I really like is card sorting. So this is really good for kind of navigation titles, filters, things like that. So what you would do is, let's say you're opening a grocery shop and you want to work out which types of food need to be grouped together. So you'd write down like vegetables, fruits, meat, uh, cereals, whatever else it is, and you'd write down all of your products, give them to a few users, and say, look, if these are the titles, what are you putting into which title? And if you have some left over by the end, your titles aren't working. If people are putting things in different places, your titles aren't working. It's a nice way of working out what language people are using to understand your product. And then yeah, so this is the end. So what next? Like I said, it's iterative. You're never really done with UX. You can always improve it. You can always test it. Content will change, scope will change, the goals that you need to overcome will change. You might grow, whatever it might be. So I just put a few kind of quick ones here. There are quite a few things that can help you with this. So Google Analytics we use quite a lot. That can tell you kind of metrics. Hotjar Hotjar has a bunch of different stuff, but the one that we've been using lately and that is super useful is it has kind of heat maps of where are people clicking. You can see if they're clicking on something that isn't interactive, or if you can see if they're clicking on the buttons that you want them to click. It kind of shows you how far the average user scrolls down. So what information are most people missing? Helps you develop hierarchy. Lighthouse is something that there's a similar thing on Yoast where it has a readability score, but Lighthouse is that, but kind of deeper. It will tell you how understandable your language is. It will tell you if your colors clash for colorblind people, things like that. And then Bugwolf and Refiner, they're kind of sort of surveys. So they have things where a user can answer questions of how do they feel about certain things, or it will survey kind of flows and things like that. Yeah, that's that. Obviously, if anyone has questions, I can answer questions at any point. It doesn't have to be now. I'll put the presentation up so because obviously I went through that quite quickly, so you might be able to read it a bit more depth.
I was going to say, what is because we all notice bad UX when we see it versus necessarily appreciate good UX as always the problem. I was going to say, what is your biggest bugbear when you spot bad UX that most people don't like overlook?
Sure. I'd say the things that annoy me most because they're so easy to fix are like when I said if ours is called quick reads, don't have a button that says view our articles. Like if you're if you're trying to get me to go somewhere, use the name that you've given it. And then the other one is the sitemap one. So having hidden pages is really annoying. Like if you've got a really important page, like on our website, we try. I don't think there's anything deeper than kind of 3 pages. So it will be service hub, service page, and then kind of the service demo. That's kind of as deep as we go. If you're getting deeper than that and you've got something important that you want someone to find, they're not going to find it, and it's just a total waste of time. I think those are my 2 big ones.
Yeah, they're good. Okay, that was it. Thank you. It was really good.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob.
Cool.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
that's really
All
good,
right.
Jacob.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks,
Thank
Jacob.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.